There we go. Yes, my screen is full of me. And that is a horrible thing, so I'll switch over to the PowerPoint instead. So here we go. It is time for building an empire and implementing Power BI step by step. And as I said, this is turning to one of my go-to sessions. And it turns out that a lot of people really need and really want the foundational stuff, because it is difficult to find the question to ask if you don't even know what questions you can ask. So hopefully I'll be going through a few of those as we go along. So as most stories do, this one started with a phone call. And I was asked to come out to a customer site and look at basically a customer that had jumped with both feet first into Power BI. And they had embraced this whole self-service approach, like everything goes. Yes, we shall do this with a self-service approach. And now they wanted to discuss the state of the project. I thought I detected a bit of an undertone of desperation, so I prepared for the worst. It wasn't enough. So the thing is, I used to be a paramedic, and the first thing that you do on a scene of an accident when you arrive is known as triage, if the scene is difficult to handle enough. And this is to quickly get a grasp of the work ahead and start to prioritize patients. And that was pretty much what I had to do, because the issues in this case were absolutely legion. Their data sources were slow. Reports were hammering those very, very slow data sources. The quality was crap. The security was nowhere to be found. A lot of work was endlessly repeated, and nobody certified any data at all. So something needed to be done, stat, as this patient was pretty rapidly expiring. So how do you build an empire? Well, you build an empire on control. You build an empire on order, on structure. But you also build an empire on efficiency, on empowerment and simplicity. What I saw coming into my customer was none of that. It was the ugly aftermath of the rampant self-service BI, where control were nowhere to be found, the structure was unheard of, and empowerment meant that anyone could do exactly as they pleased. That's not an empire. That is chaos. And that's why we'll go through, for starters, we're going to use Power BI to empower users to achieve more, hopefully without chaos. And as we move along through this, we're going to see the why, what, and how of data flows and data sets. And do keep in mind that this is Power BI data flows and not Azure Data Factory data flows. And hopefully we're going to find some, I'll get out of the way, some tips along the way as well. My name is Alexander, and I'm still in awe of Benny that he manages to pronounce my name and Marcus's name very, very well. Arvidsson is the way most Americans say it, but Arvidsson is the Swedish way. I am, at least for a few more weeks, a principal solutions architect at Atea in Sweden, and that's the greatest title I've ever had because nobody knows what I do. I used to go all over the world to speak at conferences and teach courses and that kind of stuff. And then the world ended in March. And after that, I've pretty much been stuck in my home office, which is pimped out with a lot of toys and lights and stuff. So it's roughly 30 degrees in here. Ooh, the things we do. I am a data platform MVP specializing in Power BI and SQL Server. It's a kind of a weird combination, but I started with SQL Server back in the late 90s, and then I've worked my way up to the BI stack. I'm a certified trainer, which means that I train people on Microsoft products, and I co-host a podcast known as Knee Deep in Tech. And yes, that is the Doom logo. Some of you might actually be old enough to have played Doom, which is a great game. Anyway, we're going to need to take a step back. because I want to have a common ground to stand on for the remainder of this conversation. And let's play with the idea that we want to create an interactive report based off the San Francisco Police Department data from 2016. And this report, I want to see the number of crimes per district and over the hours and so on and so forth. So here is just a very quick demo where you can filter and you can see what happens as soon as I click. Stuff happens, I filter, and this is essentially the way that I use Power BI to dig into this data and find insights that is not quite apparent in the pretty big Excel file that this is based on. And that's the point. We want to make things visual. We want to make things easy to spot. So for instance, we can ask questions, is there a change during the weekdays? And it turns out that in Richmond, there is actually an uptick of crimes on Thursdays. Is it significant? Well, that's a whole different story. So this is just to give you an idea of the data set that and the data and the report that we're going to be using throughout this session. So what did we do? Well, how do we get here? For starters, we started with a data source. And in this case, the data source is a CSV file or a comma separated values file, which is roughly a text file with commas between the values. This is most often opened and edited through Excel. So that's why I use an Excel logo to show this data source. And I've taken this data source and then I've done some bad things to it. To paraphrase Patrick LeBlanc, I've become personal with my data and I massaged my data, because most of the time you can't just take the data source and visualize it, because you need to do things to it, such as you need to change data types in order for math to work. You might need to remove some data that is just not usable for your visuals. You might need to calculate something based off different columns and so on and so forth. This is known as data wrangling, and this is most often the realm of Power Query. And when we've done this, then we can plug it into the consumer. In this case, it's going to be Power BI. So this is the flow, and most of you, I'm sure, know this. But again, I want to have a basis for this conversation. So this also kind of points out an important thing. We're looking at three different competencies, really, or at least three competencies. The primary two being visual communications. That's what you're going to need to do a good report. And you need to do data analysis expressions, or DAX. That's also going to be here. Over there, you're looking at the Power Query, which is, or M, which is a language used to do wrangling. And all the way over there, you need to fix your data source. So what happens is, when it is time to do a refresh, because I need to see the freshest data. Now, you might argue that it's very unlikely that my data based off of, or my report based off 2016 data is magically going to change just because I refresh, but you kind of get the point. If I do a refresh, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to walk all the way down to my data source, or Power BI is going to go grab my data source and pull this through the whole wrangling process. Again, do all the steps in Power Query and give me back the result. Okay, what does it look like? Very glad you asked. So I'm going to go through a very quick demo in Power Query Editor, because here is where I add and change my data. This is where I massage my data. So the question is, did weather significantly impact the crime statistics? We can find these out. If I can find weather of San Francisco in 2016 and plug that into my model, then I can do some visuals on this. So yes, I could find weather also in a CSV file. So let's add that to the model and let's do some steps to really make that data usable, right? So for starters, we're going to go with the text CSV because this is a text file. I pick it up, and yeah, this is the data that I want to use. I need to remove a few columns because some of them are just not usable. Some are, surprisingly enough, null, such as the T average or the average temperature. Then again, I can always calculate that. The precipitation is not a text column. It's actually a numerical column. And since I'm in Sweden, I need to change the data type using the locale. Otherwise, this just goes haywire. And of course, this is American data. So this is precipitation in inches. And when we have that, we can always add another column that is precipitation in millimeters. And how do you convert between inches and millimeters? Well, you take the precipitation of, in inches and you multiply it by 25.4. There you go. Apparently you learned something new. And again, I need to change the data type to a numerical data type. Then we have Tmax and Tmin. Tmax is going to be in Fahrenheit, and Tmin is again in Fahrenheit. So we can add an average column for this. How do we do averages? Well, it's going to be T average, again in Fahrenheit. That's going to be Tmax plus Tmin divided by 2. There we go. And of course, we need to change the data type as well, decimal number. All right, cool. What if we want to have a Celsius, T average Celsius? Well, the math for that is slightly complex, so I put it on and just paste it in. And boom, there we go, T average Celsius, and change the data type. With that done, let's change the name of this query or this data set that we're going to be working with and call it weather data SF 2016. That's a very quick walkthrough of how I bring in this new data into my my model. Okie dokie. So let's see how we can actually use this piece of data. So we're back in the report. And what I want to do is I want to have the weather as a visual as well. So I can always see if the weather was actually doing something to the numbers. So how do we do this? Well, we go to the fields and suddenly we have a new table. And I can just use the T average Celsius and put that on that visual. Well, that is not a good visual. No, let's change that to a line and stacked column chart for starters and move the number of crimes to where it belongs. That's going to be the line values. And okay, there we go. T average Celsius. And be aware that it will always, let me remove me. It will always default to average, to sum. But there's something strange here. Why is everything the same? Well, it turns out that we don't have a connection between the dates. As it is, there's no filtering, there's no relationships, and this is exactly what Marcus was talking about. So here I connect the date table with the weather data, and I have a date table because date tables are cool, just as Marcus told us. And suddenly we can see the temperature over the course of the year. And we also changed the title text to say that it is the average temperature. So that was how we add this data. We have now made the report more usable because suddenly we have more data and suddenly we can do comparisons and stuff like that. But we've also made the whole shebang an order of magnitude more complex. I'll show you what I mean with that. So suddenly we don't have just one data source. And to be absolutely fair, it is extremely rare to only have one data source. It's fantastic when you can have only one data source because it makes everything that much easier. But at the end of the day, most of the time you're going to find that you have more than one. So we have, in this case, two, and they both have a set of Power Query data wrangling steps on them. What happens if I were to refresh my my report? Again, this is based off historical data, so it's not going to change anything. But just play with the idea that this would be real-time data. So every time I refreshed, I'm going to grab new data. Okay, what's going to happen is that we're going to go to every darn data source, regardless, and we're going to be pulling it through the queries, and then we have it back here. Okay, we are already starting to see the ugly effects of Power BI, or potential effects of Power BI, I should say. This is not a bug. This is by design, but you need to be aware of the way it works. But wait, it can get worse. Oh, when I'm involved, everything can get worse. Just ask my wife. So what we are looking at here is one report. What if someone says, oh, that is an amazing report, I'm going to do my own. And then they whip up their own report based off the same files, like this. What happens when everybody starts refreshing, you think? Well, yeah, the shit is going to hit the fan because all these reports are going to go grab the same data over and over and over again. And suddenly we are hammering the data sources like crazy. This is not a good way of doing things because you're now adding to the stress of the data source for every report you create. This is redundant. This is stupid. This is not the way to do things. What if we could just reuse all that Power Query magic? Funny you should say that, because there is something known as the data flows. And if you're ever interested in going deep in data flows, I cannot recommend Matthew Roche enough. Matthew Roche is on the CAT team for Power BI, the same team as Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc and Casper de Jong. They are absolutely amazing people. And the things that they don't know about these things, well, you don't need to care. So Matthew is amazing. He has a lot written about data flows. So what is data flows? Well, let's see. What if I can take these steps, all the steps that I've done to all my data in order to get it from point A to point usable, and I just take that and I store it in a data lake. You do not need to care about this data lake at this moment. Just remember that it's stored in a data lake. That's all you need to know. This is now called a Power BI data flow. And a data flow is under the hood. It's a set of text files, really, that has the base data and the steps taken to massage the data. And this gets exposed as another data source. So I can now connect a Power BI report to this data flow. And we get two interesting effects from this. One is, if I were to change the data flow, i.e. change the logic, well, my report is based off that data flow, so my report is going to change. What's even better, I can do multiple reports from the same data source. Again, this is exposed as a data source. And I have a great example for this. There is something in Sweden called Statistics Sweden, and that is a government body that gives that provides the statistics for whatever you can come up with in Sweden, like the number of citizens, the the average amount of years in school, and average prices for real estate. All that stuff is there. Unfortunately, they only give it to you in either a convoluted Excel file or in JSON. And well, I hate JSON, but it still needs to be done. So I have a fairly complex Power Query that takes the JSON, chews it up a bit, and gives me the result in Power Query. And either I can tell everybody that wants to do a report how to do the whole JSON stuff and watch them lose their sanity, or I can do the whole JSON conversion thing in a data flow and then just give my users the data flow to do their thing on. So that's reuse, baby. It is absolutely fantastic. What's even better is, remember the issue with the hammering of the data sources? Well, if I do a refresh of my Power BI report, what do you think is going to happen? Exactly. We're going to go to the data lake. We are going to go to the data flow, and then we're going to pull the data to the report. And this means that whenever I do the same with the other reports, we're just going to go to the lake. So it is absolutely imperative that you refresh the data flow and not only the data, the report. More about that in a bit, but do remember that when you create a data flow, you need to set up refresh for that data flow as well. But now we are nowhere near the original data. We do not touch the data sources. And if the data sources were some kind of special snowflake and very sensitive database that we cannot go and just hammer whenever we want to, this is a great way to get the data in a controlled manner, because it doesn't matter how many times people click refresh in Power BI. It is not going to go all the way down to the data source. Okay. What do we gain here? Well, we are reducing the risk of deviating data. And what I mean with that is, it's fine if 5 people build reports, because you're going to build them off the same data, i.e. the same data flow. You're not going to find yourself in a situation where everybody and their cat is building reports off the same base data, but doing their different kinds of Power Query. And you might find this to be a bit amusing, but just think of what could happen if we're talking about financial data or medical data and someone screws up a step in Power Query. That can have consequences. So this is a great way of making sure that the data is kosher all the way up to the report. This also increases the performance, because we're not pulling data from the source system. We are offloading this to a data lake. And so far, it's not even your data lake. It's going to be an internal data lake inside of Power BI. And again, more about that in a bit. And third, it's going to be easier to find the data source, because you don't need to give people a long URL to find a data source on the internet, or give them a lot of login information for a database or whatever it may be. You just have your data source all the way up as a data flow, and this is exposed and available to your users. In essence, everybody is happier with data flows. Data flows make people smile. And fourth, actually, you can use what's known as incremental refresh to make sure that you've never pulled in more data than has changed. Incremental refresh works on a kind of high watermark way of making sure that you only grab what's changed, so you don't refresh everything from your data source when you refresh your data flow. Okay, cool. Is that it with data flows? No, not so much. Not so much at all. For starters, how the heck do you build them? Well, I'm very happy you asked. So a data flow is not stored in Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop can talk to a data flow and access the data inside it just like any other data source. That's easy. but you can't create the data flow inside of Power BI Desktop. That's not where you do it. So this is done on the Power BI service. And of course, anybody who's running Power BI report server, you're up shit creek without a paddle, because this cannot be done with the on-prem version of Power BI report server. I'm terribly sorry. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like this. You pretty much go and choose a data source. And here is where we just go and click create a data source, and then we choose where we want to go. And as you can see, we have almost complete parity with the data sources inside of Power BI Desktop and here in the data flows. So what is the data flow based off? Well, it is the M code. And here things are starting to click into place, because this is the M code, or the steps taken in Power Query to do the changes we did to our weather data. Yep, it is a lot of gobbledygook, but if you look at what it says, it's not that hard to figure out. So we have some kind of source. That's kind of useful. And then we do stuff like change type. We are changing the different columns to the data types that we want to have. We also remove a set of columns because some of them I didn't need. I've renamed a column. I have added a custom column, which is, for instance, the precipitation in millimeters, which is going to be precipitation in inches times 25.4. So everything we did, all the steps we did graphically, they're here, but in text form. And I wish I could say that, yeah, I've done this for so long, I don't even touch the graphical stuff. Heck no. Of course I do. I am lazy. I'm not stupid. I am lazy. Or as Patrick put it, I'm efficient. So of course we do this graphically. But in this case, we can really benefit from knowing about the textual stuff and being even more lazy. So here is all the steps that's been taken. We can reuse this when we do the data flow. Because let's play with the idea that we want to take all the steps we did with the weather data and put that into a data flow. Let's look at that. So what we need to do is we have the source, and this is going to be a CSV document, and here we have a directory. It's going to be ctemp Power BI blah blah blah. There's my CSV file. Wait a second. Hold it there, Professor. We have an issue because we have the data source. The data source is on my machine. And I just told you that we're not working with Power BI Desktop at the moment. We're working with the service. And how on earth is this moron from Sweden thinking that we can actually get access to the data source on my machine in the cloud? Duh. There's a way. It's called the Power BI Gateway. And the Power BI Gateway is a piece of software that you install as close as possible to the data source, not necessarily on the same machine, but as close as you can get it. And then the gateway takes care of talking to Power BI, the service, i.e. the gateway is the one thing that initiates contact. So Power BI goes, yeah, I'd like that file, please. And Power BI Gateway goes, I'll fix it, and goes and grabs it and pushes it up to the service. All good and well. But what if I told you there's a way of leveraging another piece of software so we do not have to put in the gateway? Now, the gateway is dead easy to install, and it almost always works. Yeah, almost always. And it is almost always fast. But there's no point in having it unless you really need to. And I would argue for this scenario, we don't need it. I'm going to show you what I mean. So instead, we have the data source. What if we save this file on OneDrive? Because what is OneDrive? Apart from being amazing? Well, OneDrive is a good thing. Most often it works. But underneath OneDrive is actually SharePoint. And what is happening is whenever I save something on my local machine, it gets automatically synced to the cloud, to basically SharePoint or my OneDrive here. And suddenly that takes care of the transfer of the data to the cloud. I don't need a gateway on my machine. And I can use the web API connector in Power BI to go grab the data from the cloud because it's already in the cloud. And then, of course, we'll have Power BI data flows or the Power BI service. And there we go. For some unfathomable reason, about once an hour, my headset resets, but I'm back now. So then Power BI data flows or the Power BI service can go read the data from my OneDrive, i.e. from the cloud. Much more efficient. Okay, so how do you do it? Here we are in the portal. So let's go create a new Power BI data flow. What we're going to do is we're going to go click Create and say Data Flow. Here we can do a lot of things, but we're going to go with defining new entities. And there's a lot of data sources we can use, but the one we need is the Web API all the way down here. So we're going to click Web API, and now I'm already cheated a bit because I have the whole URL, and I've already logged into my organizational account, so I don't need to do that more. I click Next, and it's going to go out and touch that file and see what it looks like. And what do you know? This is the exact same data that we had. Then we go to the advanced editor. Remember the DAX code we had earlier? Well, I'm going to take away all this except the source and then paste in all the steps we did. Click OK. What do you know? Oh, it's all done. And then I just give the data flow a name, weather data SF 2016, and then I click Close. Is that it? Well, I need to save the data flow with a name because this is now a data source that I'll be showing my users. And this one is the most important thing here. Because remember what I told you about suddenly I need to refresh the data flow as well. So this is where you do the initial refresh, i.e. go out to the data source and grab the data and toss it into the lake. But then you also need to set up a refresh schedule that will refresh the data on a constant basis. So this is pretty much what we did. This is the original. So this is the data flow. The only difference is that I've changed out that. Instead of a file directory on my machine, it is now referencing my SharePoint, i.e. my OneDrive. Is it always this easy? No. But I would argue that 90% of the time it is this easy. And 90% of the time you can do all the steps in your graphical editor, which is fast and easy in Power BI Desktop, and then you just grab the steps and put them on up into the cloud. So very, very easy way of producing a lot of M code very, very quickly. So what does this mean? Well, when I do a refresh of my data flow, then it's going to go out to the data sources and grab the data and pull the data through my Power Query steps and dump the result back into the Power BI data flow, i.e. the data lake. Everything I've shown you so far is Power BI, well, everything is Power BI free, really. But if you want to share it with anybody, it's going to be Power BI Pro. But it's not premium territory. Nothing of the things that I've shown you so far require a premium tenant, be it a P1 or an A4 or an EM1 or whatever you want to have. But there are some aspects of data flows that do require premium. And you can either look at premium as a horrible way to completely and utterly destroy your budget, which unfortunately is the way that most people look at it, or you can see all the amazing features you get with a premium tenant, or you can have both and read the Mark Lelyveld's very informative blog post on how you can leverage an A4 SKU. That's a kind of premium environment that you can spin up and shut down. So you can pretty much have the cookie and eat it at the same time, which is darn nice. So the things that you can do with premium is, for instance, a computed entity and a linked entity. And these are kind of, when you start to combine data, like merging stuff inside of Power Query, that's where you have a linked entities and computed entities. Because suddenly Power BI and data flows can take these fairly complex calculations and toss that on the enhanced compute engine inside of the Power BI data flows. This is part of Premium. So it offloads a lot of that work to another engine that suddenly you don't need to push the data source in a way. So computed entities, linked entities are premium only, as is incremental refresh with data flows. And that is a bit of a bummer, but it is what it is. So what do we gain from this? Well, it's almost the same Power Query. Most of the time, it's actually going to be the exact same Power Query. You've only changed the source. In some specific cases, you're going to find that you need to do some tweaking, because especially in the beginning when we had data flows, a lot of stuff was not exposed in the data flows environment, but now it is, and we're getting new connectors almost every week, I should say. There are some features that require premium, and you can probably get away with a lot without buying premium, but don't stare and get stuck on the price. Yes, it is expensive, but it gives you so much. So don't just go too expensive and run. Look at it. It might actually be worth it. And always, always, always consider the refresh, because if you don't do a refresh, well, you don't have any data in your lake, and people are going to go, hey, dude, where's my data? That should be an interesting movie, by the way. Dude, where's my data? Not sure that I'd buy a ticket for it, but well, we'll see. So is data flows the answer to everything? No. It is a very, very valuable step, and it is an absolute necessity. It's a cornerstone for sure, but it is not all-encompassing. And I'm going to show you what I mean with that. Remember this. First, we had the number of crimes per month and average temperature, and for some reason, I had the same temperature for all the months. Yeah, but then I fixed it by adding a connection in my model, right? So what I did was I added this. And why am I showing you this again? Well, we're looking at a data model and we have the dates. For this to work, we need to have a date table. And as Marcus was explaining, the reason for a date table is to get some pretty nifty date calculations. Take, for instance, the police department, the crime data. We know exactly when a crime was reported. But I can't tell from, or I can, because I'm human, I can tell that, okay, that was in the first quarter. But if I want to do math on everything that happened in the first quarter, How can how can I get the sum of number of crimes for that quarter? Well, I need to go through all the rows and figure out which quarter is this in. But if I have a date table that also contains the quarter for every specific date, voila, I can actually filter and just filter away everything that is not in that quarter. So that's a way to use the date table. And as you can see, I also have a kind of a timetable over there, because this is a way to figure out the time. So I don't care if a crime was committed on 4:26:25 a.m. Was it between 4 and 5 a.m.? Now we're talking. That's That's much more useful for me. So that's why I have a time table over there, which works exactly like the date table. But the point I'm trying to make here is these are not part of the data flow. And it gets worse. The entire logic for that report is based off one measure. That's it. One measure and one measure only. And that is not in the Power BI data flow either. So what is this Power BI data flow useful for? Because suddenly I don't have any logic. Yeah. Hold your horses. I'm going to show you how to get around that. Because I can take my data model, you know, the thing that Marcus was talking about for a whole hour, the data model, and I can do multiple reports off that data model. So I can use the data model to share my logic, share all my stuff like my my date table, my timetable, any and all measures. I don't need to recreate these for every darn report I make. No, I just create one data model and then I share that data set. It's called the Power BI data set, and everybody and their cat can connect to that data set and make their own reports. That way, not only do I know that the data is kosher, I also know that the calculations and the dates and the metadata stuff is kosher. And there we go again, reuse. So this is pretty much what it looks like. We have the reports over here. They're connected to a data set, which in turn is connected to a data flow. And we can always make things even better, because we can do something called endorsements. This used to be doable only on data flows, but since it's now been added to the data sets as well. So I can not only promote my data set or my data flow, which it's going to put it at the very top of the list of different data sources and data sets that I have. I can also certify it. And what does it mean to certify a data set or a data flow? Absolutely nothing. A certified data set it doesn't say anything, because the only mechanism here is that you as an admin decide who is authorized to certify a data set. And that person can then flip a switch and suddenly the data set or the data flow is certified. You need to put in the process. There's nothing magical about it. So use this with caution. It's super usable or useful, but use it with caution. This brings me to something that I talked about in the beginning, because we can now have separation of duties. Suddenly we can have people that are absolutely amazing with wrangling stuff and the base data model in the data tables. They can do their thing with Power Query or M. Super nice. This is where you can find me. I'm fairly strong with the whole data stuff, and I'm decent with Power Query. You're not going to find me anywhere near here, because DAX hurts my brain. There are people that are exceptionally good at DAX. I'm looking at you, Marco Russo, and Alberto Ferrari, for instance. What they don't know about DAX, don't bother, because they literally wrote the book on DAX, a few of them. But here you can have people that are experts in doing the logical modeling, adding measures, adding date tables, all that kind of stuff. And then you have the people that do the reports. And trust me when I say that just because you can do a report doesn't mean you should. Because it is just like people call presentation skills a soft skill. I call it a core skill. But just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're good at something technically. It doesn't mean that you're good at explaining it. And that's why I think it is absolutely super important that you have people with cognitive skills, specialists in cognitive sciences, for instance, that do the reports. This is hard. This is not just pretty pictures and nice colors. No, this is a discipline in its own. So suddenly we can have separation of duties. People who are skilled at the different steps can do their thing, and you still have great quality and great, everything just works all through the flow of your data. See what I did there? So how do we move forward from this? Because we are now in Power BI nirvana, right? We're getting there. Remember I told you about the data lake a few times? Yeah. Okay. So with Power BI data flows, you get handed a data lake. That's pretty convenient. You don't have to care about this. You don't need to worry about it at all. You don't need to set it up. You don't need to handle anything with it. The flip side of that is you can access it. Why would you want to access a data flow anyway? Well, I can see two scenarios. One is the obvious one. If I can do some data wrangling in Power Query and then dump the results in a data lake, and I have a third-party tool that reads the data, because the data gets stored in text files as well, I can add that to a third-party tool that has nothing to do with Power BI. That could be pretty useful. And you can also do it the other way around, because you know, or we know, the exact format of a data flow. We know exactly how to programmatically create a data flow. You add the data in a specific format. You add a manifest file in JSON format. You add a few other bits and pieces. And then that's going to show up inside of Power BI as a Power BI data flow. So suddenly you can automatically create data flows from whatever your state looks like. So if you can just hack together a piece of code that creates stuff for you, automation, that's good stuff. Well, now you can create your data flows and have those exposed. That is a reason for bringing your own data lake. And that's pretty much what it's called, bring your own data lake. There is a bit of a warning that I need to give you here. It is easy to take your automatically given data lake and take the data out of it and put it into your own data lake. But at the moment, you can't go back. So don't do this as a test, because you're not going to be able to get back. And don't ask me how I know that. So what can we go to further enhance this? Well, this is technically not a technology issue. This is more of a conceptual thing. Because what you can do is you can create a workspace in Power BI dedicated to data flows. And suddenly people don't need to see your data flows in their raw state. Well, you can always have people that should work on the data flows have access to that workspace. But everybody else, no, they don't need to see those. Otherwise, they're going to show up in the same workspace if you're using app workspaces. So that could be one way of further separating the duties not only by how you create the different things, but also how you manage access and that kind of stuff. And then we have what's known as a data catalog, and this has nothing to do with Power BI. Absolutely nothing to do with Power BI. This is pretty much keeping track of your data. And why would you need to do that? Well, I have a home office. I'm fairly confident that I can tell you where my scissors are. I think I know where my charger is, but I'm not entirely sure where the long USB-C cable is. This is where data catalog comes into play. This is where I have all the information about my data. So say, for instance, that I need to do a report on salaries. Where do I find this information? Well, I go to the data catalog and I check, okay, I want to have HR data. And HR data, well, you have it here. And when it comes to specifics, I want to have these salaries. Well, that's going to be in this specific zone and this specific catalog in my data lake or in this database or in this text file, wherever it may be. It's all about metadata. So keeping track of your data, because the vast amount of data that companies today have amassed, it's almost hopeless to find your way through it. And it doesn't matter if you have a bazillion rows of data if you can't find anything in it. So keep it simple, stupid. Implement a data catalog. And this kind of goes hand in hand with what's known as a data culture. Data culture is all about bringing everybody in. It's no longer, well, that's your issue or that's going to be her problem. Now, data is pervasive. Data is everywhere. And almost anything we do, every decision we make is based on data. So why don't bring people into this whole mix? It is absolutely stupid to have the technical department or the IT department do all the nitty-bitty gritty stuff with data and then just hand the whole thing over to one of those pesky users. Don't. Talk to the users. Let the users know that you're interested in listening. Make sure that the users are explaining to you what they want. And just like Marcus answered one of the questions, talk to the users. Because at the end of the day, the technical department or the IT department does not have any point of being unless you're actively supporting your users. So a data culture is all about getting everybody on board, and holy cow, you can do some serious cool stuff when everybody is on board. My goal was pretty much to give you food for thought, how you might take back control and increase order efficiency and empowerment. So we can conclude that order is absolutely necessary. And one of the promises of Power BI is the whole self-service BI stuff. It is amazing, but it is also a one-way ticket into a quicksand. Unless you put up some guardrails, some serious guardrails, and really think of what you're doing, you can very, very quickly find yourself off the beaten path and basically off the tracks. Reuse will increase efficiency because as long as you reuse data, you know for a fact it is not strange, it is not corrupted. You know that the data flow is okay. Then you expose the data flow to a data set and you know that the data set is okay, and then you create your report. Because as we were talking before we started this recording, we were talking about COVID-19 data. And there's a reason I haven't done any visuals or anything with COVID data. And that is because the data is absolutely shit. I'm sorry to say, but it is. So the only point I can make with the available data, I think, is that you must be very, very critical of your data. You must know where it came from and how it came to be, because otherwise you are comparing bananas to small Japanese cars. And finally, the whole empowerment thing will ensure collaboration. People want to make cool stuff. They want to be a part of this next big thing. And I'm not that good with financial stuff, but I have a pet controller that knows everything about money, basically. So why don't I capitalize on using her skill to help me to create whatever they need? So empowerment makes sure that everybody wants to come play, basically. So in conclusion, stop inviting chaos and hope that things will work out for the best. Take it from the project that I started with. They won't. Instead, use the tools and the people available to work smarter. Make sure that the business is on board. Everybody wants to come play, the whole empowerment thing, and always have a very, very, very clear why as your guiding star for every step. Let's go build an empire with Power BI. It is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Alexander. And this is where you can find me. Knee-deep-in-tech.com is the site, the blog site, and also where we put up the podcast. Arctic DBA on Twitter, or you can dump me an email or just listen to Knee Deep in Tech. Again, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Alexander. There's 2 questions actually.
Oh dear.
So the first one is, does Dataflows support row-level security? Because if you're sharing the data, that's usually the biggest challenge.
I don't know, to be honest. Let's see if I can find the answer. Row-level security. No, I don't think it does.
Well, I'm assuming that with some of the things in the future, it might be, but not at this point.
Exactly. It's in the roadmap, the public roadmap. It's definitely something that needs to happen. But I also know for a fact that it is fiendishly difficult to implement.
Yeah. And one other one. Well, if we're combining it with another data set, then can it be achieved? So
combining 2 data sets?
Yeah.
Are we talking inside of Dataflows, or when we're talking combining data sets? Or at the report level, perhaps?
Yeah, it's difficult to deduce from the question, but I'm assuming that if we're using a Dataflows where we cannot do row-level security, and then we're combining another data source into a single data set, then can we add more row-level security there? Which means that we should be doing row-level security in the data set, presumably.
That is also a very interesting question. I don't know. I'm guessing that it would be doable, but I don't know. Very good questions. And this is why I love presenting, because people are always going to ask you questions that you just go, huh? And that's how we learn. That's how everybody learns.
Exactly. Another one is Power Query in ADF wrangling data flows or data wrangling flows, whatever they're called these days. Is it the same? Because just by looking at user interfaces, they look different.
It's the same engine, but there's where the similarities end. So be very careful with the wrangling data flows. It's too kind to call it a beta. just saying that. It hopefully, and this is me thinking ahead and looking into a crystal ball kind of thing. I think and I hope that it's going to be the same engine underneath and maybe even unified. So Power Query might be its own thing. That would kind of make sense. But at the moment, yes, it is the same syntax, but it does not behave in exactly the same way, and it's nowhere near as feature complete as Power Query in Power BI is.
Right. Then one more. That's the last one that I've got queued up right now. Is there any, DAX, M, or other limitations that you've encountered when using data flows?
There used to be a lot of things that you could not do with Power Query when data flows first came out. But that was it a year and a half ago? So I haven't found anything that I could not get to run in the data flow that I could get to run in the desktop recently. So I'm sure there are limitations, but I have not come across any of them recently. So it's become much better.
In the early days, I had some issues with native queries on database sources, but I haven't checked it again.
No, the native queries I think worked fine. I also had some interesting things with merging and that kind of stuff. It just didn't work, but now it does.
Yep. So that's all the questions that I've got queued up right here, Alexander. So thank you for your wonderful session.